Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all the ships at sea. America's love affair with the House of Saud is tainted, filthy, and needs to end pronto. Why exactly is it so? Why would a nation founded on Judeo-Christian principles tie itself so tightly to an Islamic one so bent on its own destruction? Now, before you make claims that I am spewing untruths, or worse yet, quote-unquote disinformation, please sit back for a spell and allow this puppet to elaborate. Soon after the nation of Saudi Arabia was founded in 1932, the United States government established formal diplomatic relations with the Muslim kingdom. To what benefit? Well, you can read myriad reasons. It really boils down to nothing other than one: big oil, of course. Think about this. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy ruled over by the Al Saud family. If that does not sound like a recipe for totalitarianism, nothing does. This is, for all intents and purposes, an ultra-wealthy family wielding an iron fist under the guise of strict Sunni Islamist law over an entire nation's populace. What about a nation that espouses democracy schmoozing with this rigid Muslim caliphate does not seem quite right to you? They say that politics makes strange bedfellows, and this, my viewers, is the strangest one of all, if not also the most hypocritical. In the 1930s, it was apparent to the United States government that automobiles were the future, especially for a nation with so vast a land area to traverse. But exactly how would we fuel such a large number of motor vehicles? Sure, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Texas had regions of petroleum reserves, but that one nation in the Middle East had it in spades. Enter Saudi Arabia. Here was a newly founded Muslim kingdom, afraid of its neighbor state enemies, and without an established military apparatus to defend itself. Enter the United States of America. It was, for all intents and purposes, a win-win arrangement for both sides, was it not? Let's delve into this a little further before we make that call. There are no women's rights in Saudi Arabia, plain and simple. Women are viewed as property and can legally be beaten by their husbands for anything deemed as disobedience. Contrast this to the women's rights movements in the United States, a nation where women are afforded nearly every same right as men. Voting, working, women can even run for political office in the U.S. Instead, in Saudi Arabia, women were not even allowed to be educated until 1956, and 50% of them in modern times are in fact illiterate. Let's take this the next step and look for a moment at a very popular Saudi tradition, that of domestic workers. Saudi sheikhs rich on oil money need status, and a good part of status is having domestic workers. You know, housemaids, chauffeurs, nannies, and gardeners. The only trouble is that they are not going to allow fellow Saudi women and men to fill those subservient roles. No, they look to foreigners instead. Foreigners from Kenya, Somalia, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Philippines. The way this works is there will be hiring agencies, read pimps, in these nations to openly advertise for and hire workers to travel to Saudi Arabia for 2-year contracts. The Saudi family, along with the pimp, buy the airline tickets, but it is up to the foreigner to fund their own passports and travel visas. Once the foreigner arrives in Saudi Arabia, the employer promptly confiscates their passport and travel visa until the 2-year contract is up. The foreigner is now effectively in prison and at the whim of often evil employers. If they try to escape and run away, they are often caught by Saudi police and thrown into overcrowded jails where they rot for years, and all for the crime of escaping abuses and cruelty. As you can see, this is a system rife for abuse and human trafficking, and indeed that happens on a regular and recurring basis in Saudi Arabia. Once the foreigner is in captivity with their employer because they cannot exit the country without their passport and visa, which in turn means that they are now at the mercy of often demanding and downright slave driver employers, read masters. Many housemaids and nanny women are raped by Saudi men, and if they reject the advances, many will have boiling water poured on them. The stories of disfigured, impregnated, and even maimed Asian and African women coming back from Saudi Arabia are not uncommon and are widespread. There are accounts of foreign servants being given spoiled food items as their only food source, and without any transportation, they are now allowed to either starve or eat the rancid food presented to them. There are also accounts of foreign women out walking in full-length burqas to the store to buy necessary items, being stopped by Saudi police and demanded that they get into their cars. Their crimes? Being an unchaperoned female on the streets. If they get into the police cars, they will quickly whisked to the Saudi jails where they will rot for years. Does anyone besides me see a wicked evil trend here? Next, allow us to look at the abuse the Sauds have rained on their supposed ally, the United States of America, over the decades. Does anyone remember the late Richard Nixon years and the little thing otherwise known as the OPEC oil embargo that began in 1973? Well, it turns out that the inflated oil prices the Arabs were charging, which really put the hurt on American citizens and companies, profited the House of Saud so well that they promptly began purchasing military weapons and armaments from the U.S. en masse. So unbeknownst to the average American citizen, the U.S. federal government feigned disdain for the OPEC oil embargo to the United States, all while profiting On the backside, from the sale of military equipment in the succeeding years to the same scoundrels. Who could have guessed? Fast forward to 2001, specifically September 11th of that year, 19 agents of evil crashed 3 jet aircraft in the United States in what is now described simply as 9/11, killing 2,977 innocent victims. Oh, by the way, 15 of these attackers came from Saudi Arabia. Nothing of great concern, is it? The U.S. federal government quickly tried to sweep that under the rug, and mysteriously so. Fast forward to today. A video clip was released a couple weeks ago that was evidently shot by a Saudi official in the months leading up to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, whereby he seems to be scoping out the U.S. Capitol for pre-operation surveillance. This video was known of by U.S. intelligence in 2001, having been turned over by British intelligence, but has now only become known to the rest of us. There are relatives and family members of those who were killed in 9/11 attacks who are now rightfully demanding the Saudi government be finally held accountable, over 20 years after the fact. Additionally, The Atlantic has released a scathing article whereby it claims that the Saudi embassy in the U.S. provided funds and housing and cars for the 9/11 attackers in the years and months leading up to the attacks. This, my viewers, demands justice and immediate reaction by the U.S. against the House of Saud. The likelihood of it happening, however, are next to nil. Finally, let us take a look at the death of a Saudi journalist named Jamal Khashoggi. This was a journalist who openly and honestly critiqued the reigning Saudi monarchy, particularly the policies of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the son of King Salman and Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler. After going into self-imposed exile in the U.S. in 2017, Khashoggi wrote on a regular column for the Washington Post whereby he openly criticized bin Salman. In his first column for the Washington Post, he wrote that he feared arrest due to a crackdown on dissent in the kingdom by Salman. In September 2018, Khashoggi visited the Saudi consulate located in Istanbul, Turkey, in order to obtain documentation of his prior divorce so that he could proceed with marrying his Turkish fiancée. During that visit, he was instructed that he would need to return on October 2, 2018 to retrieve the document he needed. He never suspected that anything bad could happen to him on Turkish soil. His fiancée accompanied him to the consulate on October 2nd and waited for him outside. He was last seen on security camera footage entering the consulate at 1:14 p.m. local Istanbul time. His fiancée then waited for 10 long, agonizing hours outside, with Mr. Khashoggi never returning. For more than 2 weeks, the Saudi government denied any knowledge of what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told Bloomberg News that the journalist had left the consulate after a few minutes or 1 hour, and then added, "We have nothing to hide." Then, in a change of tune, on October 20th, the Saudi government said a preliminary investigation by prosecutors had concluded that the journalist died during a fight after resisting attempts to return him to Saudi Arabia. Later, a Saudi official attributed the death to a chokehold. On November 15, Saudi Arabia's deputy public prosecutor, Shalan el-Shalan, said the murder was ordered by a head of a negotiations team sent to Istanbul by the Saudi deputy intelligence chief to bring Khashoggi back to the kingdom either by means of persuasion or, if that failed, by force. Investigators concluded that Khashoggi was forcibly restrained after a struggle and injected with a large amount of a drug, resulting in an overdose that led to his death. Mr. Shalan said, his body was then dismembered and handed over to a local collaborator outside the consulate for disposal, he added. Wow, if that is not Al Capone tactics, then nothing is. 5 individuals had confessed to the murder, Mr. Shalan asserted, adding, the Crown Prince did not have any knowledge about it. Right. So let's try to understand this, viewers. A nation that espouses freedom of the press openly sells military equipment to, and also offers protection to, a rogue criminal monarchy that openly kills journalists for speaking out against it and openly engages in human trafficking and modern-day slavery. Wow. This, my viewers, is more than enough. Are you willing to settle for this? We have ended diplomatic relations with other dictatorships for less. Why is the House of Saud afforded a special place in U.S. international relations, all while openly sponsoring those who murdered innocent American civilians on September 11, 2001. It is far past time for this to end, and for the El Saud family to pay for the crimes they have committed. Good night, and sleep well.